Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So for this first demo, we are going to be working with filters, and we're going to be turning in a photo that looks just like this, something that you could have taken on your phone. This one I took on my phone of some geese, and we're going to turn it into something that looks like this, something that looks very painterly and texturized. Hopefully we can add some of this texture that makes it look like it's on top of a canvas, and we're going to use some really cool tools, so I'm going to show you how to do all of that. So to get started, let's go ahead and create a new document. It'll be 5 inches by 7 inches. You can do it landscape or portrait, 300 resolution, RGB color, and go ahead and click create. And I'm just going to go ahead and drag in my original image. You may have to crop it or kind of resize it based on whatever image you're dragging in. And this should be a pretty quick assignment. So I'm going to show you the filters that I used to achieve this look, and then you can kind of experiment around with the other filters, but I want to show you a few of them before we get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is duplicate this layer. So I'm going to press Ctrl J or Command J if you're on a Mac. So now we have this Goose original copy, so it'll be the copy of whichever file that you had dragged in. And we're going to go up to this tab called Filter. So up here, we're going to go into Blur Gallery, and then you can choose preferably one of these top 3. Field Blur is what we're going to start with, just so that we can kind of talk about this. So this is going to start by opening up this little extra section that's going to give us some tools in order to add blur, to create depth, to create kind of a depth of field kind of effect. So with field blur, this is going to blur out the entire thing. So the more that we blur it, it doesn't really change if you're close to this dot or far from this dot, it doesn't matter. Everything gets blurred. So I'm going to uncheck this one and check on iris blur now. You can see with iris blur, we get a new tool. So this is saying wherever this dot is going to give us a more clear field of view. You can stretch this around, squeeze it in and out, rotate it. So we may say that we really want this particular goose to be really in focus, but maybe we want this goose to also be in focus, so we can have 2 sections. Maybe we want to add it so that it's kind of overlapping. And you can see how this is a little bit affecting how quickly that blur gets affected inside of here. This wheel is going to also change the blur setting up here. It's going to increase the amount. And so the name of the game with a lot of these filters is subtlety. So you can see like there's a really quick transition here. We probably don't want such a sudden transition. We also want it to not be too harsh, so we might even take this down to about 5, maybe around 6. So I think that looks pretty nice. I'm going to turn this off for now, but we're going to turn it back on in a minute. So for tilt shift, this is something you might recognize from like Instagram or your phone app settings. So this allows you to blur out the top and bottom of an area. You can also rotate this around so it's at an angle or straight up and down if you hold shift. And what you can do is change this dotted line on either side, and that's going to change how quickly things become blurred out. You can see how that's affecting the picture behind it. You can also rotate these around and move this up and down so that you get a better closeness. You can change the distortion right here, and you can change the blur itself up here, so you might not want so much blur, but maybe quite a bit of distortion. And you can kind of mess around with it. If you drag up and down on these lines without touching the dot, you can kind of manipulate how closely this is being affected. And usually you want to keep your focal point in the center of this dot, in the center of your blur, so that you don't get that too hazy, if that makes sense. Okay, So now, let's turn off that. So now let's go ahead and talk about this effects panel really quick. So I want to talk about bokeh, and what that is it's going to create from the light that's in the picture, these little circles that are popping out. You might see that in like night photography a lot, where highlights of like Christmas lights in the background are big circles instead of a particular instead of a particular shape. They're all kind of blended into each other as circles. So I'm going to kind of affect the light range in my picture to kind of pop out some of these highlights in the foreground and really brighten up the background. You can play with the bokeh color. I think it might be pronounced bokeh, but if it's not, I'll feel a bit silly. So, but you can go ahead and manipulate that a bit. I don't want it to be bright orange and bright blue. I want it to be kind of subtle, but I don't want it to be all the way to white. So we'll give it just a little bit of color. And you can see as I raise that light effect, it's going to grab more of those colors. As I adjust this light range, that's going to tell me where I'm grabbing that light to mess with the effect. So you can see as I push it all the way to the left, it's picking up a lot more of this light range than before. So let's say I wasn't using the effect at all, it's kind of finding stuff here. So we're gonna kind of shrink that a little bit, and I don't want it all the way up to the top. I want it just a little bit lower so that I can grab some of these closer to mid-tone lights. And I want it just before it kind of overblows it, so I think that looks pretty nice to me. Spin blur, let's talk about that really quick. I don't think that it'll be very useful for this project, but let's go ahead and talk about it. Basically what that is, it's creating this like very quick warp. So that might be something that you could use if you're trying to show like an album spinning, or like ripples in water. That might be something you might use it for. My computer doesn't have a very good time with this particular effect, so that's all I'm going to do to mess with it, but we won't be using that today anyway. And then path blur. Path blur is going to kind of follow a path, and you can see it kind of is giving a second version of the picture a stretch, and it's going in whichever direction I'm aiming this arrow. So you can see, especially right here on this goose's jaw, how it's kind of getting affected. And I believe you can have more than one path even. And you can change this speed. So the speed is about how intense that warping is happening. So this might be really good for kind of sports photos. It wouldn't necessarily be exactly like this. This might be a little bit intense, but that can be something that you could use to show like motion, or you might use it in like a car ad, things like that. Anytime where you're trying to show a lot of movement, that would be a good use of it. So I'm gonna go ahead and stick with this tilt shift. I might enhance it just a little bit more. I want his feet mostly in focus, but I don't want that to be where people look at. And I don't really want the background to be super in focus, because I do really want you to be paying attention to the geese. So I think that looks nice. I'm gonna go ahead and click OK. And you can see, since this was a smart object, it's added this blur into my filters. So now I have, we'll call this filtered. So if I click back and forth between my original, you can see those changes that we made. Now I'm going to start with some of the filters that I listed off in the Word document. Alright, so after that, what I'm going to add is oil painting. So we're going to go into Filter, Stylize, and choose Oil Paint. And I'm going to leave it with these settings, and you can see how it's affecting my picture already. And so this is going to be one of those first really big pushes into making it look like it's a painted piece, because it's giving it that effect almost of giving like painterly strokes. And you can manipulate these around a little bit if you want to. Mostly what I would focus on is the shine. The intensity of that can really change things, and like I said, part of the name of this game is subtlety. So we're going to go back to 0.3 and leave it at that setting. Alright, the next one I'm going to do is surface blur. So let's go ahead and have that selected. We'll go to filter and we'll go into blur and surface blur. And these are the settings for this one that I'm going to be using, so 20 and 10. I'm going to move these around a little bit so you can kind of see how it's affecting things. Usually when threshold is involved, radius doesn't have as much effect when threshold is low. When threshold is high, it has a little bit more range of an effect. So if you set the threshold pretty low, so we'll set it back at 10, you can see that it's not going to have as much control, but you can see how it's kind of softening a little bit. So this is more of a blur again. So we'll set it back to 20 and 10 and click OK. And you can see over here on the right, my filters are now stacking, and you can turn these on and off. And you can turn these on and off independent of one another too. Alright, the next one I want to show you is going to be here in Filter Gallery. And so this opens up a huge gallery of a lot of different options that you can use, and like I said, kind of stacking them together, and subtlety is really the name of the game here, but I want to go through a few of these with you. Some of these might be like angled strokes, cross hatching. You can mess with these settings and that can affect it a little bit more, so it'll probably be a little bit clearer when you're just working off of your original photo, but you can go ahead and play around with these and see how it does. Some of them are definitely better than others. What we would like for our purposes, at least for if you're following along with the Word document. So what we're going to use is this accented edges tool, and you can see a little bit of a difference when I do that. You can see how it kind of darkens up these edges here, and you want it to kind of push things along. So I'm going to move this out a little bit more. You can see how it's really making these edges a little bit sharper, especially around my goose. Okay, so the nice thing about having this as a smart filter also is you can go back and edit things. So if I double click on this, I can still go back and change things that are inside of here. So maybe I wanted this to have a little bit more brightness than what I had it at originally. We can edit that still and click OK and it'll update. Okay, so the next one that I'm going to add is a noise filter. So we'll go into filter, noise, and then we'll do add noise. And I'm going to leave it at this setting as well. We just want it really low. It's going to add, I'll show you at kind of its extremes. It gives it this really hazy texture, almost like it's static when you're watching old TV shows or old movies. So you can add a little bit of that and it'll give it almost a texture that kind of gives it a bit of uniformity, like it's all meant to be part of each other. This is something that people do a lot when they are painting in digital tools in Photoshop or in Procreate, things like that, to give it that kind of textured look in these colors so that it doesn't feel so airbrushed, so digital, I guess you could say. So you could give it just a little bit of, I might make it a little bit higher than what I had it before. Let's set it to 10. 10 looks pretty good. I'm gonna set OK. Okay, so the next filter that we're going to add is called High Pass. So that's going to be, get that selected, go into Filter, Other, and High Pass. I'm going to set that at 2 pixels. And you can see as I make that stronger, what that's doing is finding these smoother spots that have lower contrast and really emphasizing that low contrast and grabbing the edges and emphasizing those edges here. So we're gonna make it a little bit more subtle than that. We just want the edges where the feathers are stronger, some of the ripples in the water, and it might be different on yours. So again, look for what feels right for you. But we're gonna click OK, and then I'm gonna double click on these sliders, and I'm gonna set this blending mode into overlay. Okay, I'm gonna turn the eyeball on and off, and it's really subtle changes. It might not be even loading quickly enough, but that's off, and then here it is with it on, and it's just a little bit sharper around the edges. That's just gonna help in a minute. Okay, so the next one we're gonna add is going to be similar to this filter gallery one. So we'll go back into filter gallery, and for this part, what I wanna do is add kind of a texture that makes it look like it's on canvas. So that's going to be texturizer down here. So it's in texture, that bottom folder, and then texturizer. So when I zoom in really close, you can see some of that already happening. It sets it at canvas originally. I like it when it has a really big scale, because you can really see that canvas texture, and you can turn the relief down. I think I would leave it at 4. For me, I think I prefer the way that it looks on burlap. It gives just a little bit more of that stronger sense. You can click invert, it's not going to change a whole lot, and then where the kind of artificial light is reflecting off of kind of highlights off the side, you can change that angle if you want to as well. I'm just going to leave it from the top, and we can go ahead and click OK. And so now this is what we have in our layer stack. So if I turn off smart filters, you can see what we were starting with and where we're at now, and that's a pretty big difference. So next I'm going to click on high pass. I'm going to add one more filter, and this one I would save right here. So I'll do a file and save, just because it is a lot of pressure on your computer. It takes up a lot of memory, and so just in case I don't want you guys to lose any of your artwork already, I want you to go ahead and make sure that you're saving it. So if you're on the newer version of Photoshop, you should have this option called neural filters. And it has a few things in beta in here, but I want to show you what it has a little bit. So with style transfer, and you'll probably have to click on this cloud, that'll be right here, and download it. But if you turn on the style transfer, you get some of these options that give you kind of this ability to turn your piece into kind of an approximation of these different artworks. So I really like this one. I believe it is Monet, and it gives you this really pretty kind of painting effect, kind of this Impressionist style, which is really beautiful. And I'm going to turn down some of these settings a little bit because it's a little bit strong. But I think what I'll stick with here is around 50 and 50 here. And then I think I'll turn this down a little bit too. Maybe not too much. I really like these splotches down here. I like kind of the colors that it's adding. I know that you can turn on this preserve color and it'll kind of go back to the colors that you were stuck or that you were working with originally. I think what it's trying to do is bring in some of these blues and greens, these aquas, and then some of these more orangey yellows. So you can see kind of these changes here, and neither one is bad. I like both of them really, but I think that that's something that you might kind of experiment around with and kind of play with these sliders and see what works best. That looks good. Click OK. I'm going to move neural filter down in the layer stack so that that texture that we added for the canvas kind of effect is right on top and very pronounced. And I might turn that down just a little bit. So we can go into opacity and kind of bring that down just a little, so that it's not quite so strong. And we can click OK. We could also double click and go into the filter that we set up itself. And so maybe we want that relief to be more like a 3, so that's not quite so strong. You can click OK. And that is going to do it for this piece. Go ahead and play around with some other filters. There is one more thing I want to show you before I let you go though. So filter and then blur and then Gaussian blur. This one is going to be one of your really common filters that you'll use, especially if you're doing more painting in Photoshop than you are photo editing. But you can see how all of this background is getting fuzzed out at kind of the same amount. So let's go ahead and set that, and we'll click in the smart filters and go into our brushes. So I'm going to be kind of affecting how strong that is in certain areas. So you can paint in black and white, obviously, to cover things up, but you can also paint in grays. So let's go ahead and switch this to the gradient tool. And if I do Control I in here, and I have my paint set to white, and so what that's going to do is, as I add that in, it's going to apply some of that filter for me, kind of in the same way that we did the tilt shift, but it gives us just a little bit more control. And so if you wanted to brush in some of your detail back, but you didn't want it too harsh, you could change the opacity of it. And you can have a lot of control over what's going on in here. So maybe I want to make sure that my other goose in the background is very visible. We can kind of include more of that blur on his tail, maybe more blur on the water over here. Maybe we want this bridge really fuzzy. It kind of gives us a little bit more control over that depth of field even. There we go. You can kind of see how it could affect it. So that's before and that's after. That's just something that you have the option of too. So that's something that I wanted to make sure that I got to show you before I let you go. Anyway, I'm going to delete that layer and turn my original filtered one back on. So this looks pretty nice to me, I think, and that could be something that you could use as a painting in the background of one of your pieces even, or you could print it out and make it into a postcard. It could be really neat. And you can do that with any picture that you're working with. So you didn't paint these geese in, obviously, but that feels like you kind of painted in these strokes, you know? So I think that that's a really neat kind of process, and you got to see a little bit of using filters and stacking filters. And so we only have this last week left, and then just a little bit of time at the end of the semester. So just like a couple days after the end of this weekend. That's when your final is going to be due. These 3 kind of revision images are all going to be due this Sunday, the 19th. And then also on top of that, you'll notice that there's not a revision or a critique section for any of these remaining 3 projects. So the only thing you'll have to do is try adding these filters in, and then uploading it. You won't have to do any critiquing for these, and you won't have to do any revision on it. Okay, so I just wanted to let you know on those. Alright, have a good night, you guys.